Courage, divinity, and suffering possess no physical weight. They are organizational constructions of the human mind, invisible potentials not existing in the natural world. Yet for tens of thousands of years, we have demonstrated a relentless drive to force these thoughts into a tangible, perceptible state. Sculpture functions as the primary technology for this transformation. It converts the temporal patterns of the mind into persistent material forms. The history of these objects archives the changing architecture of human thought. Every shift in style reflects a reorganization of how we categorize reality. Sculpture is an external cognitive artifact, a stabilizing mechanism civilizations use to anchor and transmit their evolving concepts across time. To track this process, we can apply a formal framework known as the continuity equation. On the left, M represents raw material, stone or bronze, which holds no inherent meaning. It must be combined with OC, the specific cultural organization of a concept. The result is FC, or form. This is a material organization now capable of reactivating that specific, invisible concept in the mind of any future observer. This establishes a persistent feedback loop, allowing a complex idea to survive entirely outside of an individual human nervous system. By applying this equation to a 30,000-year dataset, we can map the evolution of human cognition with mathematical precision. The dataset begins roughly 30 millennia ago with a limestone figurine found at Willendorf. Modern eyes see a fertility goddess, but that label is a projection. While scientific analysis can establish the age and material of this stone, the specific conceptual boundaries its makers drew remain invisible to us. This very ambiguity points to a state of conceptual bundling. Because reproduction, survival, and the sacred were likely inseparable, they were compressed into a single material form. This object served as a concentrated carrier for distinct potentials: abundance, sexuality, motherhood, and survival. Contrast this with the Hellenistic Venus de Milo, carved nearly 30,000 years later. Greek civilization differentiated the prehistoric bundle. They extracted beauty from the requirements of biological survival, specializing it into a distinct, personified divine power, capable of affecting human behavior. Conceptual progress is not marked by the mastery of realism. It is marked by the ability to unpack and specialize these bundled concepts into distinct cultural domains. We see a similar trajectory in the concept of power. To map its evolution, we must ask where a civilization locates organizational authority. In classical depictions like the Laocoon, power exists outside the human. It manifests as fate, an external, situational constraint. The twisting muscles and the entanglement with serpents express the body as an instrument of failure. Human capacity is shown strictly in its struggle against forces greater than itself. During the Renaissance, the location of this authority shifted. Michelangelo's David marks the point where power migrates from the environment into the individual. Because David is shown before taking action, his strength is not muscular. It is the internal capacity for perception, judgment, and readiness, the power of the individual will preparing to act. Power has evolved from an external force that acts upon humans into an internal agency that acts upon the world.
In the modern era, as psychology and evolutionary theory complicate the idea of the autonomous hero, power migrates further inward. Auguste Rodin moved the struggle entirely into the cognitive realm. The thinking body is the physical exterior for mental strain. Muscularity is no longer a tool for action. It is a metaphor for the psychological conflict happening within. After the global traumas of the 20th century, this internal focus stripped away the illusion of the heroic, muscular person entirely. Alberto Giacometti reduced the human form to its most essential state. In this work, power is defined as existential persistence. It is the capacity of a vulnerable organism to continue moving through space despite total isolation. The sculptural vector tracks the evolution of the I, from a subject of the gods to an autonomous hero, and finally to a questioned, isolated consciousness. We can test this evolution by comparing the Western sequence with a parallel trajectory, the Buddhist vector. While the Renaissance defined power as outward action, the Buddhist tradition stabilized a different organizational goal: Here, power is actualized as inward regulation. It is the capacity for wisdom, detachment, and serenity. This specific actualization survived for millennia through cultural translation, moving from India through Central Asia to China and Japan. A persistent conceptual nucleus, awakening and compassion, is repeatedly combined with new, localized aesthetic conventions and technologies. Early formulations in Mathura emphasized indigenous Indian bodily ideals, while other regions incorporated Hellenistic naturalism. The later Gupta synthesis reorganized these traits into a spiritualized presence, creating the influential model for subsequent traditions across Asia. This proves that a concept achieves longevity not by remaining static, but by dynamically reorganizing its physical form to interface with new cultural fields. These trajectories challenge the assumption that civilization moves in a straight line, from primitive abstraction to anatomical realism. We must separate anatomical accuracy from embedded conceptual meaning. A highly realistic classical statue contains vast amounts of anatomical data, yet its conceptual content, ideal proportion, is relatively straightforward. Compare this to a radically non-naturalistic figure. By utilizing multiple limbs and complex iconography, this sculpture communicates a high-level cosmology, creation, destruction, and cosmic order, that is impossible to express through realistic anatomy alone. Different civilizations engineered different visual architectures to solve the same problem, making the invisible visible. This feedback loop reveals the true function of the continuity equation. The individual conceiving a statue dies. The society commissioning it disappears, but the stabilized material remains. Sculpture functions as an external cognitive memory. It preserves organized thought across millennia, surviving long after the biological nervous system that conceived it has vanished. We see this across the 30,000-year gap between bundled prehistoric stones and the isolated existential figures of the 20th century. Sculpture is a persistent cognitive architecture. It stabilizes human concepts in matter so they can cross the discontinuity of individual mortality. We shape the matter, but the materialized concepts are what shape and continually reshape us.